There's a kind of faith that doesn't make sense, a kind of faith that breaks every rule you've known. It stands firm when everything is falling apart. It doesn't require evidence. It doesn't rely on logic. It refuses to shrink even in the face of impossibility. That, beloved, is supernatural faith. You see, many of us have faith that operates within reason. Faith that needs confirmation. Faith that checks the weather before believing for rain. Faith that consults the bank account before saying yes to the vision. And while that kind of faith might be enough to get us by, it's not enough to get us through. Because the things God has placed on the inside of you, those dreams, those whispers in the night, those wild callings that won't let you sleep, those things require a different kind of faith. The kind that breaks out of the box. The kind that says, I don't need to see it to believe it. I believe it, therefore I will see it. Supernatural faith isn't comfortable. It will stretch you. It will ask you to walk when you can't see the road, It will ask you to speak when your voice is trembling. It will ask you to believe when the report says it's over. But hear me, that is where miracles are born. That's where the supernatural invades the natural. That's where heaven partners with earth. We've gotten so used to surviving that we've forgotten we were made to conquer, so used to the rhythm of fear and doubt that we've accepted disappointment as a part of our identity. But disappointment is not your name. Fear is not your friend. Doubt is not your destiny. You were born to believe beyond belief. You were created to move in the authority of the one who spoke the universe into existence. That same voice lives in you. When you begin to develop supernatural faith, you will notice that it disrupts everything around you. People will look at you like you've lost your mind. They'll say, "Oh, be realistic." They'll ask you, "How are you going to do that?" And your answer will be, I'm trusting the one who called me. Faith like this doesn't rely on sight, it relies on relationship. You have to know who God is, not just what he can do. Because if your faith is only in the outcome, you'll waver when things don't go your way. But when your faith is rooted in his character, in his unchanging nature, then even the storm becomes your stage. Even the valley becomes a path to glory. You can say, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him," not because you like the pain, but because you know the promise. Sometimes we think faith means we won't face trials, that if we just believe hard enough, nothing bad will happen. But beloved, that's not supernatural faith, that's superstition. Supernatural faith doesn't deny the fire. It walks through it knowing who walks with you. It doesn't panic in the lion's den. It rests in the promise that the mouths of lions have already been shut. You don't develop this kind of faith in comfort. You develop it in the crushing, in the waiting. In the silence, in the not yet. That's where faith is formed. That's where you learn to hear the whisper of God over the scream of circumstance. That's where you stop checking your surroundings and start checking his word. There will be moments, dark moments, when it feels like nothing is working. Something is working. When the promise looks further than ever. When people walk away and doors close and your strength is gone. In those moments, you must choose to believe anyway. That is supernatural faith. To believe when there's no reason to hope when the evidence says give up. To praise when your heart is breaking. You might be thinking, "But I'm tired. I don't have that kind of faith." Listen, supernatural faith isn't about how strong you are. It's about how surrendered you are. It's not about striving. It's about trusting. It's about saying, God is saying, "God, I don't understand this. I don't like this, but I trust you. And I'll keep walking." God never asked you to manufacture faith. He asked you to receive it. Because faith is not a performance, it's a gift. And like every gift, it grows when you steward it. It grows when you speak it. It grows when you move in it. Don't wait for your feelings to catch up. Move. Faith is not a feeling, it's a decision. And when you move in faith, feelings follow. There's a generation waiting on the other side of your obedience. There's a lives tied to your yes. And the enemy knows it. That's why he attacks your faith. Because if he can shake your belief, he can stop your movement. But we serve a God who finishes what he starts. And if he called you, he will equip you. If he gave you the vision, he will provide the provision. You don't need every step. Just the next one. You don't need every answer, just a yes. You don't need everyone's approval, just God's hand. Supernatural faith doesn't wait for conditions to be perfect. It creates the conditions. It says, I will not bow to fear. I will not shrink in the face of delay. I will not settle for a watered down version of God's promise. I want everything He said is mine. It's time to rise. Time to dust off the dreams. Time to stop rehearsing the losses and start declaring the victory. You were made for more than survival. You were made to be a sign and a wonder. You were made to walk on water, not because the water changed, but because your faith did. Don't you dare give up now. Don't you dare settle for what's safe. Safe is not your portion, supernatural is. And you don't need to understand the outcome to obey the instruction. You don't need all the answers to take the next step. You just need to believe. You just need to trust. You just need to develop supernatural faith. Because when you do, the impossible becomes your reality. Heaven becomes your atmosphere. And your life becomes a living testimony that says to the world, this is what God can do when someone believes without limits. Supernatural faith begins where logic ends. It doesn't function within the confines of what makes sense or what can be measured. Logic says, show me the facts. Faith says, I go without them. Logic wants guarantees, a safety net, a backup plan. But supernatural faith stands firm with nothing to hold on to except a word from God. It steps out when the ground hasn't appeared yet. It says yes when everything screams no. It doesn't need confirmation. It moves because the Spirit whispered. When you try to mix logic with supernatural faith, something breaks. You'll either water down your faith to make it logical, or you'll reject logic to embrace a reality that only heaven sees. And this isn't a call to ignorance or recklessness. It's a call to radical trust. A call to believe that the creator of the universe knows what he's doing, even when you don't. Supernatural faith is birthed in places where logic fails, when the door shuts in your face, when the resources don't show up, when the people you thought would support you disappear, when the path ahead makes absolutely no sense. This kind of faith looks foolish to those around you. People will call you naive, irresponsible, overly spiritual. They'll tell you to think realistically, but faith was never meant to be realistic. Realistic thinking will keep you stuck in the natural. Supernatural faith lifts you into alignment with the impossible. It shifts your vision so you no longer see what is, you see what will be. It trains your spirit to trust God beyond your five senses. It silences the voice of fear and tunes your ear to heaven. Faith is not opposed to reason. It's just higher. It doesn't ignore reality. It overrides it. When logic ends, faith begins to speak. It starts saying things like, I will be healed. Y will walk in purpose. Y will see what God promised. And it says those things with no evidence in sight. That's the kind of faith that opens blind eyes, that raises the dead things, that calls what isn't as though it already is. That's not optimism. It's spiritual authority. We've been trained to overthink everything, to weigh every risk, to demand outcomes before we take action. But faith is different. Faith says, I don't know how this will work, but I know who God is. Faith doesn't calculate odds. It stands on covenant. And when your spirit truly grasps that God cannot lie, you stop needing the math to work. You stop needing the math to work. You just move. You move with confidence, because faith is not rooted in what you know. It's rooted in who you know. This is why God often allows situations that defy explanation, because he's building a kind of faith in you that no storm can shake, a faith that survives the silence, that thrives in uncertainty, a faith that walks on water while everyone else stays in the boat, a faith that says, if God said it, I'll believe it, whether or not it makes sense. Faith thrives in surrender, not strength. It's easy to think that having faith means you have to be strong all the time, always confident, always bold, always certain. But that's not the truth of supernatural faith. Real, raw faith often shows up in moments of weakness, not in power. It's birthed when we come to the end of ourselves, when we realize that our own strength will never be enough. Faith begins to flourish when we stop trying to carry everything and start laying it all down. Surrender is not defeat, it's alignment. It's the moment you stop wrestling with your own limitations and allow God to move freely. When you surrender, you're saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my ability to figure this out. And that is where faith starts to grow. Not in the moments you feel strong, but in the moments you feel completely dependent. Because faith is not self-confidence, it's God-confidence. It's not about having all the answers, it's about trusting the one who does. The world celebrates self-reliance, but the kingdom honors dependence. See? In the kingdom, surrender is strength. It's the soil where miracles take root. It's what gives faith the space to breathe, to stretch, to rise above the fear that tries to cage it in. Surrender silences the voice of control and allows the voice of God to take the lead. And that's where supernatural faith can finally move. Not when we're holding on tight, but when we've let go. Some of the most powerful moments in scripture came from a place of surrender. When Mary said, "Be it unto me according to your word," she didn't fully understand what was happening, but she surrendered and faith was activated. When Jesus prayed in Gethsemane, "And not my will, but yours be done," he wasn't standing in strength, he was sweating blood. But it was in that surrender that the greatest act of faith was fulfilled. We keep waiting to feel brave enough before we obey, strong enough before we move, certain enough before we say yes. But faith doesn't wait for strength, it grows in surrender. It grows when you say yes even while you're trembling, when you take the step even while your knees are shaking, when you choose to trust even with tears in your eyes. That's where real faith lives, not in perfection but in dependence. Surrender strips you of performance. It frees you from the pressure to prove. It invites you into a relationship with God where your weakness becomes a platform for His strength. And the more you surrender, the more faith you find. Because you begin to realize that it was never about your ability to hold it all together. It was always about His ability to hold you. And when you live from that place, your faith doesn't just survive, it thrives. The promise requires your obedience, not your understanding. This is where many of us get stuck. We want clarity before we move. We want the full blueprint, the timeline, the assurance that everything will work out exactly how we imagine. But faith doesn't work like that. When God speaks a promise over your life, He isn't asking you to understand how it's going to unfold. He's asking you to trust Him enough to obey, even when nothing makes sense. Obedience is the currency of the supernatural. It's what activates the promise. It's not our analysis that brings God's word to pass. It's our obedience. And obedience is often uncomfortable. It pulls us out of our comfort zone. It calls us to places that don't align with logic. It requires us to walk into situations where we can't see the outcome. But when you obey God without having all the details, you make room for heaven to move on your behalf. There are countless moments in scripture where obedience preceded the miracle. Noah didn't understand why he was building an ark when there was no rain, but he obeyed. Abraham didn't know how a nation would come from his body when he and Sarah were barren, but he obeyed. Peter didn't understand why casting the net again would be different, but he obeyed. And the net broke with abundance. Every time someone obeyed without understanding, the supernatural followed. Why? Because obedience proves that you trust God more than your own mind. When you prioritize understanding, you delay the promise. You'll hesitate. You'll rationalize yourself out of the blessing. You'll wait for perfect conditions that never arrive. But obedience doesn't wait. Obedience says, I don't get it, but I trust the one who gave the instruction. That kind of posture touches heaven. That kind of obedience is what accelerates destiny. The promise isn't waiting on God. It's waiting on your yes. And the truth is, sometimes you won't see the purpose of your obedience until you're on the other side. You may not know what your yes is breaking open in the spirit realm. You may not see what chains are falling, what doors are opening, what hearts are being softened. All because you said yes in faith. In faith. Obedience is never wasted, even when you don't see immediate results. God doesn't need your understanding to perform His word. He needs your agreement, your alignment, your willingness to say, even if I don't know the full picture, I know the one who does. And that's enough. Understanding is a gift, but obedience is a requirement. It's your yes that heaven moves on. It's your obedience that pulls the future into your now. The promise is already spoken, already alive. But it's your obedience that unlocks it. Delay is not denial, it's divine development. When things take longer than expected, when the promise seems to be lingering just out of reach, our first instinct is to question God. We wonder if he changed his mind, if we did something wrong, if maybe we misunderstood. But what if the delay isn't a punishment? What if it's preparation? God is never late, but he is very intentional. And when he delays a promise, it's never to withhold, it's to develop. There are things we pray for that they are not yet ready to carry. A blessing out of season can feel like a burden. So in his mercy, God waits. Not because he's forgotten, but because he's forming something in you. He's building character, stretching capacity, deepening trust. Delay is where endurance is born. It's where faith becomes real. In the waiting, you learn how to worship without results. You learn how to stand when nothing changes. The opposite, you learn how to believe when everything says give up. We live in a world that wants everything fast. Immediate success, instant answers, microwave miracles. But the kingdom doesn't work like that. God is more concerned with your becoming than your arriving. He's more invested in who you're becoming through the process than in giving you the promise prematurely. Because what good is a platform if your character can't sustain it? What good is influence if your identity still depends on approval? Some of the greatest movements of God were born out of delay. Joseph had dreams at 17, but the promise didn't manifest until years later, after betrayal, false accusations, and prison. David was anointed king as a young man, but he didn't sit on the throne until years of running and hiding in caves. Even Jesus waited 30 years before stepping into his public ministry. Delay didn't disqualify them, it prepared them. And it's preparing you too. You may not see it now, but in the delay, strength is rising. Wisdom is being cultivated. Faith is taking root. God is not stalling, he's shaping. And the beauty of divine delay is that when the promise finally shows up, it doesn't come to a version of you that's anxious and unprepared. It comes to a version of you that's ready, refined, and resilient. Don't curse the delay. Don't rush the process. There are things God is doing behind the scenes that would blow your mind if you could see them. There are connections being made, doors being aligned, hearts being prepared. And when it finally comes together, you'll realize that the delay was never a detour. It was destiny being woven, one thread at a time. Trust that what looks like a pause is actually a setup. And though the vision tarries, wait for it. It will surely come and it will not delay. Your faith creates the atmosphere for the miraculous. God moves where there is belief. Not just casual belief, but deep, unwavering faith that expects him to show up. Faith isn't just a concept. It's a force. It shifts rooms. It changes climates. It opens portals between heaven and earth. Wherever faith is present, the supernatural is not far behind. You don't have to wait for a perfect moment or a holy place. You carry the atmosphere of miracles within you when you choose to believe. Faith sets the stage. It builds the environment where God can move freely. When Jesus walked the earth, he often said, "Your faith has made you well." It wasn't just his power. It was the atmosphere that the person's faith created that put healing into their moment. In one place, Jesus couldn't do many miracles, not because he lacked power, but because there was no faith. That's how vital your belief is. Faith becomes the runway for God's glory to land. You can't always control your circumstances, but you can control your atmosphere. You can choose what kind of environment surrounds your life, your home, your thoughts. When you begin to speak words of faith, when you begin to worship through the storm, when you begin to declare God's promises, even in the middle of the battle, something shifts. Faith begins to build a space where miracles feel welcome. Miracles don't thrive in doubt. They don't flourish in fear. They are attracted to faith. Even mustard seed faith can move mountains when it's real, when it's alive, when it dares to believe that God can do the impossible. The miraculous isn't reserved for perfect people. It's reserved for believing people. Those who say, Oh God, I may not see it yet, but I believe you're able. I may not feel it yet, but I trust that you're moving. You create that atmosphere, words, with your posture, with your expectation. Expectation is a form of faith. It's waking up each day looking for God to show up. It's praying prayers that don't just ask, but believe. It's refusing to let disappointment close the door on hope. When your heart remains open, when your spirit remains expectant, heaven responds. Angels are drawn to faith. Breakthroughs are attracted to the sound of belief. You might be in a dry place right now, but faith can rain on dry ground. You might be facing a wall, but faith brings the walls down. Faith invites heaven to invade earth. It tells your situation, I don't care what it looks like. I know who God is. And when you walk in that kind of bold belief, when you build that kind of environment, miracles are no longer rare. They become your reality. Faith creates a place, the impossible becomes normal. Supernatural faith is not just a concept to admire, it's a lifestyle to embody. It's the call to rise above natural thinking, to silence the noise of fear, and to anchor yourself in a realm where God's voice carries more weight than circumstances. This kind of faith will challenge you. It will confront the areas in your life where control has been masquerading as trust. It will reveal where you've settled for comfort instead of calling. But more than anything, it will unlock the fullness of what God has placed within you. The journey into supernatural faith isn't about perfection. It's about pursuit. It's about choosing to believe when there's nothing left to hold on to but a word. It's about leaning even when the outcome is uncertain, and trusting that God is still good, still faithful, still working. Supernatural faith doesn't make you invincible. It makes you unshakable. Not because storms won't come, but because your foundation isn't in what's seen. It's in who is unseen. When you begin to develop this kind of faith, everything around you begins to respond. You stop living from reaction and start living from revelation. You stop echoing fear and start declaring truth. You move, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Because God spoke. Because you know He finishes what He starts. Faith turns your life into a prophetic declaration. One that says, I don't need the approval of man. I don't need all the pieces. I just need God's presence. There will be moments when you're tempted to shrink. Moments when the waiting feels too long. The cost feels too high. The silence feels too loud. But in those moments, remember this. The same God who called you is walking with you. Walking with you. The same God who spoke the promise will bring it to pass. And what He is developing in you through your faith is more valuable than anything you could gain without it. He's growing you into someone who not only receives the miracle, but hosts it. Someone who carries His glory. Someone who becomes a living, breathing testimony of His power. Supernatural faith is not about hype or emotionalism. It's not about pretending everything is fine. It's about a deep, quiet, resilient trust that says, even if I don't see it yet, I know it's already done. That kind of faith shifts the atmosphere. That kind of faith opens doors no man can shut. That kind of faith turns valleys into victory grounds. So stand firm, speak boldly, move with courage. Let your faith stretch you, refine you, and lead you. Because when you develop supernatural faith, you don't just witness miracles, you become one. You become the evidence of what happens when a person dares to believe God with everything they have. And from that place, you begin to live not just a natural life, but a supernatural one, led by purpose, fueled by faith, and grounded in the unshakable truth that with God, absolutely nothing is impossible.